Hey there, what's
Hi,
up?
Jonathan. Thank you so much for your patience getting this up and ready.
No, you're good. You're good. How are you?
Pretty well. How about yourself?
Yeah, we're doing all right. Are you in
Hey
New
there.
York?
What's up? Thank you so much for your patience getting this up and ready.
Huh?
I
Sorry, we're
think
getting a little
YouTube in the background.
loop going on. Yeah. You in New
Uh,
York?
well, no, we just got back from a site visit up at the American School for the Deaf today, so I'm in Connecticut.
Right on. And Connecticut, your home base?
For cARTie, it is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, great.
And
Well,
right now it's just about 1 p.m. by you, right?
yeah, that's right. That's exactly it.
Super. Well, thank you for taking a little lunch break.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm in your hands. Like as I said via email, I'm pretty flexible about this stuff. So my understanding is we'll do a little facilitated conversation and we'll go from there.
Absolutely, yes. So we approached you, Jonathan, because of your book, The Short Bus. It moved me, it moved many of our team members. You've written and you've spoken at the intersection of accessibility, of disability rights for more than a decade now, right? And your
Yeah,
work
two, two, two,
too.
two. And not to very rarely do people correct to date themselves, but yes, two decades.
And it's every bit along the way um, has inspired, I'm sure, countless individuals and organizations. We've been writing to our cARTie community about your book, and we have a few copies floating around with folks in our network. Just so you get a sense of where we're coming at. We're driving nearer and nearer toward this intersection that you work at. We're still quite far away, though, and I use the word driving quite literally. cARTie, you know, we're Connecticut's nonprofit art museum bus for young children in entire communities across the state who have limited access to the arts, whether that's because of age, and for that reason, we work with really young kids, or whether that's because of geographical location and cutting across class, race, socioeconomic, every line out there, and and the accessibility of museums as well. I use the word driving again because we have a good bit more learning to do, more driving to do to get to that intersection um, where we aspire to be the most accessible space, organization, program we can possibly be. So we are so humbled to have some time with you this afternoon to bring up some questions that from our community have been circulating. And really at the heart of it, it's trying to make sure that we are continuing to move in the direction of really becoming that fully accessible organization, space, program, and culture. So we should be having some folks. We heard our echo just before. We should be having some folks joining us to listen in on YouTube, and I have some questions from different students we work with who were really moved by different parts of your work over these past 2 decades and have questions that hopefully you will enjoy talking about, and hopefully we can learn with and from. So at any point, I'm happy to follow your lead wherever the conversation goes. But I do want to begin and ask you about Bob Marley, the bus you drove across the country. I noticed you have some shared characteristics, both 20 feet long, both driving around for a cause, both driven by people here on Zoom today. What do you think about like what mobile features stand for?
Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your community and really your movement. No pun intended on the movement side of things, but it's important work y'all are doing, and I know it's hard work, and the most important work is always hard work. So I commend you and your uh, spirit of innovation to create access, and I commend your colleagues and your students and everyone who's literally or metaphorically on that bus with you. So thank you for the opportunity to contribute in a small way to your community today. So what does sort of uh, what does a bus stand for lack of a better word? Well, in my projects, DNA was really a bus standing for exclusion first and foremost. The book, The Short Bus, which catalogs a 45,000 mile, 6-month journey around the United States, occurred in a short bus, hence the title. A short bus is a real thing. It's a vehicle that takes some, not all, but by far too many young folks with atypical brains and bodies to segregated educational programs all around the United States. The short bus was and still is a form of federally funded segregated transportation. Some kids ride the big bus to school, other kids ride the short bus. And so in my project, it was an intentional appropriation of a symbol that had been associated with segregation and stigma and shame. And it was an attempt to appropriate that symbol and transform it into something different, transform it into a vehicle of change and transformation. And I think that's where our projects really intersect. I think the idea of bringing to individuals opportunity, education, and in your case, art and cultural experiences is a profound revolt against not just the segregated model, but it's a profound revolt against all the barriers to access to education, opportunity, and learning that exist in multiple forms across America. And it's a call to action for other systems to literally bring to, or perhaps more importantly, metaphorically, remove barriers in whatever way possible to create opportunity for folks who have been historically disenfranchised and left behind.
Speaking of revolting, working against a system, you used a phrase at the start of, well, it was within your introduction, an anecdote, a moment where you're visiting a special education classroom, and there's a phrase you say to the students there: normal people suck. And you explain normal just doesn't exist. Can you tell us more?
So, I grew up on the wrong side of normal. I didn't learn to read until I was 12. I was the kid that spent a lot of the time, chilling out with the janitor in the hallway. I was the kid who grew up on a first name basis with Shirley, the receptionist in the principal's office. And I generally was made to feel that my differences were deficiencies inside of myself, that I was not normal. And I think that not normal identity and message is a message that a lot of folks who don't fit the middle of the bell curve get in their life. And a whole bunch of different types of folks get that message. LGBTQ plus folks have gotten it. Native folks have gotten it. Black and brown folks have gotten it. And folks with disabilities and neurodivergence have gotten it too. And so a big part of my personal journey of healing was trying to understand, like, hey, were they right about me? Am I deficient in some way? And that sort of led me on, I think, an intellectual project, starting with my first book. So The Short Bus is my second book, a book called Learning Outside the Lines, to really try to understand where those lines come from, how they got drawn, who drew them, why, and were they real or not. And so a lot of individuals and then a lot of sort of buckets of knowledge supported me coming to the place where I could make a statement like that to a group of young people. And the validity of that statement is really evident in the sort of history of normality. So I most recently wrote a book called Normal Sucks. Very subtle title, I know. Really kind of about that notion of where this comes from. And the word normal did not enter the English language until the 1860s. It emerged within a particular cultural context of industrialization and standardization, where there was an economic imperative to make folks more alike, both as consumers and also as producers. And it's a construct that was created, not a fact that was discovered. But nonetheless, that whole notion of normal really looms over people's sense of self, their sense of value, of who they are as human beings. And so for me in my own personal journey, kind of to heal from the belief that I was deficient, and then in my advocacy journey, my work has been about really challenging that idea that normality is a fact in the world, that it's a construct that can have any merit, and really trying to encourage and advocate for folks to move away from normal as a design principle for built environments or for the world writ large, and to instead embrace the reality of human embodiment. And the reality of human embodiment is one of fallibility, is one of disability. It's one of embodied difference. And that recognition is personally liberating, but I think it's also revolutionary in a society that has been designed around the myth of norm.
So speaking of design, we're in the midst of doing some redesign of our bus right now. And I've got packets and packets, right, of information on this architectural advice corresponding to the idea and whatnot. What would be your wildest dream for seeing buses on the road that were art museums be designed for every young child to have a meaningful experience?
So first, I think it's important to just acknowledge and to celebrate what a bold and unprecedented aspiration that is in and of itself. The history of cultural institutions, the history of educational institutions, of clothing, of workspaces is one of, if you don't fit the middle of the bell curve, make yourself fit, right? I mean, look at the history of clothing. The word medium, meaning medium clothing, what I'm wearing right now, is directly from the word mean or average, which is the center of the bell curve, right? So I think when we start to really poke at this, we realize how deeply ingrained that idea of here's the bell curve, here's the middle of it, and if you don't fit the middle of it, it's your problem, not our problem. So your commitment, your aspiration to say, no, how do we design for those excluded to create access? It is a bold ambition to have. And like any other bold ambition to have, and any other sort of unprecedented vision of the world, it's hard to do, and it's hard to make real in the world. So I only say that to say, celebrate the ambition, acknowledge the enormity of the task, and be kind to oneself and others as you try to advance that in the world. So with that in mind, for me, the the paradigm shift that leads to different tactics or experiences is to move away from asking oneself, how do we accommodate X, Y, and Z group into this experience? Accommodation is obviously the language of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. And I don't mean to dismiss that as a ethical framework. It was a bold and is a bold idea that we have to accommodate those experiences that don't fit the middle of the bell curve. And it was real progress, and it still is real progress for built environments to be held legally accountable to accommodate under the ADA. But the flip side of that is that there's a little bit of a negative connotation to the word accommodation. It's kind of like the word tolerance, like we tolerate something that we're not all that psyched about. Let me put it this way, when my mother-in-law comes to town, like I don't celebrate her visit, I accommodate her visit, right? Like, so like it's got like a kind of a little bit of a subtext to it. So the shift that I aspire to is to move away from accommodation to universal design. Mm-hmm. And universal design is not my word nor my concept. There are luminaries in the field of architecture, in the field of adaptive design, and everything in between who have been advancing UDL for quite some time. And it's just recently started to get a little bit more of mainstream traction in architectural circles, built environment circles, and then education circles as well. And I'm actually very optimistic about the traction that UDL has had in our multiple spaces that are about creating access and equity. So for me, the North Star is that thinking differently from accommodation to universal design. And one of the powers of that shift is that it's not just good for some, it's good for all. Because one of the real insights of the disability and neurodivergence movement is that we are all on a continuum of cognitive and physical differences. Some parts of that continuum have more challenges associated with others. And some parts of that continuum, the physical difference or cognitive difference impairs certain functions. But all of us will fluctuate on that continuum at some point in our life. I mean, there's a saying in the disability rights movement that we're all temporarily abled bodies. This notion of ability or able-bodiedness as the typical state is actually a fiction. It's actually a transitory state, especially with aging and the valuability of human experience. So that notion of universal design recognizes that we can make interventions into an environment that benefit the person with a disability or neurodivergence, but ultimately it expands the experience for everyone involved. Mm-hmm. So my ideal environment is asking itself that question of how do we expand the circle of inclusion here with universal design as our core principle, not accommodating this difference or that difference, but anchoring it in a bigger vision of what inclusion really means.
You've got me. I mean, you had me laughing a little bit at the word accommodations. Can we talk more about labels too? In your book, well, second book, I'll zero in, right? Different people will describe themselves with different words naturally. Jeff considers himself eccentric, Miles odd. Most people you mentioned, they become who they're told to be. I want to know how you think we can support a world in which all kids, they get to search for what they want to become.
Language matters because, how we think, it informs how we act. And and it also informs how one conceptualizes themselves, what's possible for them, what's not, where they belong, where they don't. And so I think this conversation about the role of medical labels, because most of these are medicalized language, is really important, and nuanced. It's better to be dyslexic than it is to be stupid. Like when we're thinking about the constructs that have been used historically, that's progress. Better to think of oneself or one's child or one's student through the lens of ADD opposed to being bad or crazy. So we have to understand that these sort of medical categories were a progress from sort of moralizing atypical brains and bodies to sort of having a more scientific, less morally judgmental conversation. However, it's also limiting at the same time. And for me, I think the breakthrough conceptually, but then also linguistically, has been the understanding that disability it lies in the interaction between embodied difference and the environment around that embodied difference. That's not to wave away or diminish or negate the very real limitations that are biologically based that come with many of those historically seen as medical categories. Like, I suck at reading, like that I'm not dumb, I'm not lazy. That's a neurobiologically based difference. A friend of mine with cerebral palsy, that's a physical limitation, but it's not where disability lives. Disability lives in the interaction between that limitation and an environment that can accommodate, celebrate, include, whatever word we want to use, that difference. So I think that shift's really important because it allows us to talk about people not having a disability, but experiencing a disability. And that may sound like just a sort of rhetorical distinction without a difference, but there's a big difference. And having it puts it in the person, whereas experience puts it within the interaction of person and context. Mm-hmm. And I'm also very optimistic about the emergence of neurodivergence as a category that recognizes the very real limitations of dyslexia, autism, anxiety, depression, but at the same time doesn't inherently pathologize those and sees it for what it is, which is a diversion or divergence from the mean or medium. And so I think we're at a moment where within the sort of experienced disability and neurodivergent language, we've carved out a rhetorical path forward for folks to claim difference in a way that acknowledges limitation, but without pathologizing themselves and or their kids or their students. Mm-hmm. And that space is really important for all of us to hold on to collectively, because for a while, and still to this, still currently, there was a sort of schism between the brain different group and the body different group. And that's a part of the project of the short bus, was to sort of find solidarity between all these different embodied experiences and for me to have something to learn from somebody who's deafblind, somebody who calls himself eccentric, etc. It's important for us, like the LGBTQ plus movement does, is to hold a big whole, acknowledging autism is different from dyslexia. Of course it is, but we have some common ground here. We have a common experience of ableism being used to dehumanize and discredit us, and we have common work together to advocate for people's right to be different and to advance a more just and equitable society for people who have been left behind because of brain and body differences.
That's beautiful. It's like the rhetoric of interaction too has me really interested to think more about. I mean, and because it places a lot of responsibility on the environment too. We're humans, but we're also in a world with materials all around us that, back to the universal design piece, really the two together do matter. We've worked with some different consultants, our cARTie community, and we've gotten some coaching on language, right? And exceptional. I'm curious your takes on using that word exceptional. Maybe how and when you saw, even during your journey across the United States, how and when people can feel exceptional, and what you've learned maybe about making that something that all kids can feel too.
I'm really intrigued by the reclaiming, a category of language that predated the medicalization of divergent brains and bodies, but was not in the moralization space. So when I say moralization, there's a long biblical history of divergent bodies being evil. I mean, let's just call it what it is, sinful. And so a lot of language, a lot of ethical, moral thought had been historically informed by that. And so there's this sort of bucket of knowledge and language in the sort of liminal period, transition period between medicalization and moralization, in the sort of like early 1800s, language that was sort of in the vein of eccentric, of magical, of wonderful, of queer being a word used historically for whole swaths of atypical human behavior, not just sexuality or gender. The sort of Victorian cabinet of curiosities, which was a movement of often a very eccentric, iconoclast scientists, artists, writers who collected all the variations of natural phenomena. So there was this moment in time where that language was I think in resistance to what had come before and what was coming, which was the sort of medical statistical language that would dominate the 19th century. And exceptional is one of those words, so is sort of deviant. That doesn't have to have a negative connotation to it. Our society had attributed negative connotation to that word. Mutant, mutation, right? We forget that mutation was and still is the signature biological mechanism of evolution and change. To have a mutation is to differ and in some cases to be better than what came before when it comes to survival and adaptation. So that word exceptional, I think, is in that bucket. And I think the work of making every child feel singular, which is another word that's sort of in that vein of thought, to recognize their singularity requires us to really kind of challenge the deficit facet of that medical language. ADD, dyslexia, deficit this, deficit that, that runs really deep, not just in the diagnostic categories, but then in the lived experience of young folks. They hear all about what's wrong with them. They don't hear a lot about what's right with them. And if we're truly going to embark on a project to recognize folks' singularity or their exceptional nature, it requires us to really lean into a strength-based approach and to commit ourselves to being those people, whether it's as an educator, a parent, or just as a human, that sort of finds the good in every single student or person that they engage with.
And you do show us how to do that in your writing. So
well, thank you. Yeah, that means a lot to me.
Thank you. You also explain a little bit in your writing, getting to know others, maybe who are different than yourself. It helped you develop empathy. Developing empathy, is it something that do you feel is still ongoing? What is your take on the development of empathy? And in particular, I know we'll likely have some of our educators on listening in on this live stream. And that's totally like one of the best soft skills that we can have, right? As an education team leading cARTie, to have empathy, to hold space for that strengths-based approach, outlook, all of that. What is your take on the development of empathy, and how can we do more of it?
Well, I mean, it goes without saying, but I'll say it nonetheless. Like, that is the ethical task, I think, in front of all of us who aspire to contribute to the world in a positive way. And I say an ethical task. Ethics is the thinking around action, around doing. Morality is around sort of belief systems, and it is a practice to cultivate empathy and have that be centered to your work in whatever form that manifests itself, educator or other. And that work starts with, a paraphrase of a famous philosopher, that seeing as is not the same as seeing. So when we see as, I see somebody as dyslexic, see somebody as this, it's not the full act of seeing somebody in their entirety. So I think to knit and thread forward the conversation around label and labeling, it's important for us to see people beyond those labels that attach to them. And that can be dyslexic, that can be ADD, autism, that could be at risk, or low income. The human brain is always looking for shortcuts, always looking for ways to outsource key functions. And the act of labeling and seeing folks through a particular construct is a shortcut for us to not really see the person in front of us. So I think that's important in the ethical work of empathy, to be cognizant of seeing as, and how seeing as can be a barrier to seeing the person in their totality in front of you. I think we need to be cognizant of how our digital culture is desensitizing us and short-circuiting the empathy muscle and empathy part of the brain. When a young person is watching any number of digital content for 8 hours a day, and for young men, it's often violent or aggressive digital content. there's parts of the brain that are activated, there's parts of the brain that atrophy, and empathy is one of those. So I think it's important for us to be cognizant of that, and to do things in person. I think that is a really, I understand there's access benefits, such as today. I'm here in LA, y'all are in Connecticut, there's people everywhere in between. That's rad, that's cool, I get it. But there is a power in physical presence and community. And then the last thing I'd say about building empathy is it starts with a relationship, and it starts with vulnerability on the part of the person that has more power. The number of times I've heard from a young person in my travels who said, I ask them who their favorite teacher is, and they say, oh, this teacher is my favorite teacher. And I say, why? And the kid will say, well, they like me. It's like it, like they feel cared for, they feel connected with. And when you dig deeper, you often hear stories of teachers who, have shared their own struggle or their own dyslexia or their own whatever with young people. And that was the catalyst to connection, was that vulnerability and that ability to share a part of oneself. And as we build relationship, we build empathy, and those two go hand in hand on both sides of the teaching and learning experience.
So that does bring me, we have some students' questions that I definitely want to make some room for into the conversation. And we actually have one of our current interns graduating from high school now. And we've been talking about what that means, right? And saying goodbye to mentors and all of that. Ariana, just so you know, has been tremendously helpful in also bringing this live stream together. She wants to know, how did your educational experience shape your work now?
Well, thank you for the hard work to make this live stream happen, Ariana. Appreciate it. And congratulations to you, wherever this next phase of your life is taking you. I know you got a bright future in front of you, and I appreciate being in dialogue with you in this way. I think my educational experience, it taught me what not to do and what to do, which is, you learn from both sides of that. On the what not to do side of things, education for a lot of my journey was about cultivating compliance, and it was about sorting, which human's gonna run the factory, who's gonna manage the factory, who's gonna run the machine, who's gonna sweep the floors, kind of deal. And I think that is too often the experience of school for young folks. Our approach to education emerged in the Industrial Revolution, in which it was feeding a industrial economy and the subsequent labor structure of that industrial economy. So I'm not alone in that. So was what not to do. But the other side of the coin was, there were many educators who pointed a different path forward. I had a third grade teacher who told me I could be a writer. His name was Mr. R. And I was like, are you out of your goddamn mind? I can't spell, dude. Like, what's up? And he said, you know what, Jonathan, screw spelling. He had that, put aside what you can't do, define yourself by what you can do. approach. And that fundamentally informed both my own journey, my own path, but also what I try to advocate for other students, what I hope to bring to to school systems that are trying to do better, try to do right. It comes directly from Mr. R. So I think that's uh, an important affirmation of the power that people have to make a difference, even in a flawed system. I mean, Mr. R was still in the industrial school complex, and there were many things about his teaching life that I'm sure were compromised significantly. But nonetheless, even within that flawed system, for me, he made a profound difference. And so I think that I try to take that forward. I try to take forward the idea that there are a lot of things wrong. There are a lot of things outside of my control, your control. But even within a flawed world, a flawed system, your individual contribution matters. And that's something to hold on to as you move on to the next stage of your life. But it's something for all of us to hold on to know that we can walk and chew gum. We can aspire to broad systems change, be advocates for that, be voters for that. And then we can still in our day-to-day make a difference in other people's lives.
Yeah. And that I needed to hear that other piece too. Put aside whatever you can't do. The spelling, put it aside. But each individual has something really magnificent to contribute. And we needed your books. So thank you, Jonathan. We have some friends at House of Possibilities. I don't know if you're familiar with their work, but just an incredible organization. I'll start with Tom. Tom, so you know a little bit about him, is very passionate about health and wellness. And Tom asks, do you visualize your books ahead of time? And do you think of different chapters ahead of time?
Yeah, what a great question, Tom. So, three books, three different stories, which is kind of frustrating because that means that you kind of feel like you're never figuring it out and you're kind of making it up each time you do it. But I think that is the truth about trying to write something that is authentic and its own thing. So certainly there's a North Star that is in my head about a book. What is this thing? Why should it be in the world? Who would care about it? What do I have to say? Those are kind of the iterative questions that I'm always asking myself, even when in the middle of a writing project, and trying to hold on to those. There's a left brain part of the work, of outlining and of bullet point, key points, key sequences, of course. But really there's more a right brain, see it for sure, and that's a weird thing to say because the book is not a visual medium, it's not like but there is a moment where you can kind of just see it. Like a lot of the short bus, I can still like see those moments in my head. And that's not your typical nonfiction book, because it was such a embodied experience. It was like on a bus with these people in these places. It was a, a, a visual experience because I was there. It's not about writing about, ideas necessarily. But I think most importantly, um, and this cuts through all three of the books, even though I said that the process was a little different each time, is sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I know where it's going, left brain, sometimes I don't. But the thing I've always experienced was feeling it. Like just a feeling that that's the thing to say. That's the moment that mattered to me, or matters, or could matter to somebody else. And my last book was really an experience on that. This book, Normal Sucks, because I had outlined a book, like outlined, sold it, all chapters, pitched it, all that stuff. And the book just decided it wanted to be a different book and went off the rails. And I remember I would wake up in the morning, um, early sometimes, with just this voice in my head that I had to get out. And their writers talk about, them not writing the book, but them sort of allowing the book to come out, like, which is kind of a mystical thing to say. And the book Normal Sucks was very much that experience. So I know that that's all not all that helpful for people who want to write, because it's like, oh yeah, do the outline, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but and wait till the little magical voice in your head comes and tells you what to do. I know that's not the most pragmatic advice in the world, but I think what I wish somebody would have said to me is, writing is all of the above. You got to throw all of it, all of those things at it. You got to throw the left brain at it with the bullet points and the outlines. You got to throw the right brain with visualizing things. And then you just have to be open to something that's beyond you. Or maybe it's a synergy of you. Maybe it's all those things coming together that gives you access to something that is not unconscious, because you've been thinking about it a lot, but at the same time isn't a conscious brain driven. But you got to throw all of it at it, and you have to meet each project where it wants to be, and be attuned to that, to be able to put something out there in the world that is meaningful to you. Forget other people. Like, that can't be your metric. The metric has to be, is this what I wanted to say? And if the answer is yes, then you did a good job, and no matter whether it stays in your computer and nobody reads it, or whether it becomes a bestseller, the answer is, if it's yes, then you did something. You did something that was authentically you, and that's the whole point of being a writer, from my perspective.
And it's that feeling piece too. It's another one of like the empathy muscle. Yeah. Another friend from House of Possibilities, Eddie, works at a local radio station. He loves learning about new topics. Eddie wants to know, what other struggles did you have when you were young, and how did you learn from them?
Well, I had a lot of learning challenges, as I talked about. I had a lot of kind of behavioral challenges that made kind of feeling a part of a community challenging. Community being first and foremost school. But I think a challenge that I haven't talked about today that much was challenges with relationships, which is connected to that kind of community disconnection thing, and obviously connected to that feeling dumb and deficient, which makes it hard to connect to other people. But it had its own uh, sort of road that was rocky and bumpy for me. I had real challenging relationship with my father for a number of reasons. My father was really high functioning alcoholic and substance user, which made for a very erratic childhood, fiscally and emotionally with my dad. He was also, looking retrospectively, neurodivergent himself, and he did not have his unique needs recognized or supported growing up. And he made a lot of mistakes, and never really took accountability for those mistakes. And so it's been a challenge to figure out how to mend at times, create distance at other times, and to integrate that void of relationship in my life. And I'll be frank with you, it's still not at a place of sort of resolution or closure. I think that often is an impossible thing to bring to complex relationships. We're like, okay, it's all good, I forgave, I didn't forgive, we all, I figured it out. I think what I've learned from it now is to be more comfortable sitting with the messiness of human experience, to bring to bear some of the sort of pop psych culture stuff that does matter around trauma and healing. Like, those are constructs that are helpful. But I think at this point in my life, at 47, I think I've come to just be more comfortable with the messiness of what it means to be human and to be in relationships with other humans. And in that, found a little bit more freedom and a little bit more acceptance of others, but ultimately of myself. And that's a important thing that I've learned from that particular challenge.
Thank you for sharing that with us. The messiness. That is a big learning thing that I think to learn to sit with it is not something we learn at school. It's not something you learn when you're a kid, but we can every day more a little bit, right? I've got 2 more questions for you from different students. Should I share both of them? And
Sure. Yeah. Fire away.
Nolan, who's a major self-advocate, fights for his own rights, is very interested in public safety, wants to know, how did you deal with people in the classroom calling you names because of your disability? And then Niall, passionate about theater, works at a local radio station, wants to know, if you could go back to your school, what would you say to your principal? When did you start experiencing mental health issues?
So I think there's some common themes between both of those. So I'll just kind of jump right in. I started experiencing mental health challenges probably pretty early. I have early memories of what would be categorized as sort of like obsessive thinking, early memories of like kind of anxiety spirals that would become disabling in the sense of, not wanting to go outside and things like that. And then, come when I was 12, I think when I left school for about a year, that's when I really struggled with sort of self-harm, plans for self-harm, kind of things that tip more into sort of clinical depression and experiences like that. So that was a kind of omnipresent experience, triggered, exacerbated by school experiences, obviously, and experiences of humiliation and of discrimination. Like, let's call it what it is. It ain't cool that somebody is out in the hallway with the janitor, like that's not all right. When I found myself in those places, what would I say, to kids, etc.? I'll be real. My response to a lot of that stuff was to internalize it, to believe it, to have a non-response. I get it, it's a powerful culture, and that culture of different is deficient is hard to resist. My response at other points was to resist in not the most productive ways, to punch a kid or get in a physical confrontation with the kid. And I totally get that too. I really do. In some ways, that's a healthier response than the internalizing response. The problem with that response is you're the one who gets in trouble for it. So it's inherently a self-destructive act. But I understand it. Ultimately, the healthy healing response for me, whether it be from a teacher, whether it be from another student, was to say to myself, or at times to them, I feel really bad for you. Because the truth is that bullies, whether they're kid bullies or adult bullies, trust me, they come in both forms. Bullies were bullied always. Like a bully is not somebody acting from a place of strength or confidence. It's always from a place of weakness and of self-doubt. And so understanding that makes it about you, not about them. It makes it hurt less. And so I know it's hard to feel that in the moment, especially when you're a kid. Like, that's not a thing that goes through folks' minds, but it certainly is the truth. And it's also healing to hold on to that. And then ultimately, for me, that anger, because, I had a lot of anger. It was self-destructive at times with drinking and things like that. Ultimately, I came to a place where I used that anger as fuel to prove people wrong. A friend of mine, wonderful advocate, neurodiversity advocate, social justice advocate named Roberto Rivera. You should check him out online. He's a beautiful speaker. He's a poet. Roberto Rivera likes to say that he used his pain as propane to feel his best self. And so that's what I tried to do. I tried to use that pain as fuel to build a better life for myself, and to then try to build a better, in my own small way, world for others. So that's my experience of kind of building a self in a system and world that inherently negates the self that you are. That's hard work, but it's all of our work to make sure that that environment isn't given that message first and foremost. But if we don't have control over the environment, it's our work to be a guide by the side of somebody who's in that process of extricating themselves from the idea that different is deficient, to be that voice that says, there's things that are right about you. I believe in you. I care about you. And to be that voice that says, you have something to contribute to the world that's positive, not despite your disabilities or differences, but because of them.
You've left us with so many. I want to, have a whiteboard here to write all of these key bits down, to continue lifting up the universal design, to continue lifting up those contributions, every single individual's very, very important contributions, that at the end of the day is how we create a work within a system where each individual can manifest a piece. So thank you for spending time with us today, thinking about these really challenging questions. I want to thank all the students who helped us really spend time reflecting on everything we could learn from you. And I know just an hour of your time, we have so much more to continue learning. So one last question for you is, when are you on the East Coast next? And when can we bring you aboard our bus?
I'd love to jump on the bus physically. I'm already on the bus metaphorically. I'm a big fan, and I'll reach out to you and your community next time I'm back east, and would love to come experience it in person and meet some of y'all. And my deepest gratitude, obviously, for the opportunity to speak with you today, but more importantly, my deepest gratitude for the work that you all are doing out there in the world. There's a lot of research on what interventions cultivate resiliency and perseverance in young folks who face challenges and discrimination. And the research shows that what matters is a meaningful adult in their corner who believes in them. And that meaningful adult can be a friend, it can be a mentor, it can be a teacher, it can be an art instructor. So your work matters. And not only does your work matter because of your relationship and empathy for young folks, your work around bringing art to young people matters. There's a educational philosopher named Maxine Green who wrote that the arts allow us to imagine a different future. It's not decorative. It's not a commodity. It's a tool to imagine a different self, imagine a different world, imagine a different future. And look, it's an all hands on deck moment for us to imagine a better world. And your work, your bus, is a big part of that work. So thank you for letting me be a part of it today.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That means just a tremendous lot. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing you all again, and have a wonderful end of your academic year and a wonderful summer.
Equally. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.